Welcome to the deep dive. Today, today we are going to be tackling something
Oh, yeah.
I think you've been wanting to explore a little more deeply with us,
Yeah.
which is how businesses are integrating the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples,
Right.
better known as UNDRIP, into their daily operations.
Yeah, it's an area that is rapidly evolving, moving
Yeah,
beyond just legal compliance and into a whole new way of thinking about business.
exactly. And you've brought some chapters from a great book,
Yes.
Overcoming Barriers: Solutions for Implementing UNDRIP in Business Operations.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to really dissect these chapters, pull out the most impactful points, and hopefully get you feeling confident
Yeah.
about how companies are actually putting UNDRIP principles into action.
I think you'll be surprised by some of the innovative approaches.
Okay, so before we jump into the nitty-gritty,
Yes.
can you give us a quick refresher on what UNDRIP is and why it matters so much,
Absolutely.
especially for businesses operating in Canada?
Yeah. Absolutely. So UNDRP, adopted by the UN way back in 2007, outlines the fundamental rights of Indigenous peoples globally.
Yeah.
We're talking about things like self-determination,
Right.
preserving their unique cultures' rights to their ancestral lands,
Mhm.
and perhaps most importantly, having a real voice in decisions that affect their lives and their communities.
And in Canada specifically, this takes on even greater significance.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Canada's history is
Yeah.
deeply intertwined with its Indigenous population, and for businesses integrating UNDRP isn't simply about, following the letter of the law.
Oh,
It's about acknowledging past wrongs
Yeah.
and proactively working towards a more equitable and sustainable future.
Now, one concept that jumped out at me from the book is this idea of Indigenous-centric business models.
Yes.
Can you unpack that for us? What does that actually look like in the real world beyond just a catchy phrase?
It's a fundamental shift
Yeah.
from the traditional model. An Indigenous-centric approach flips the script and places the needs, interests, and values of Indigenous communities at the forefront.
Okay.
It's not about viewing Indigenous groups as passive stakeholders,
Right.
but as active partners, collaborators in shaping the very DNA of the business.
So it's not just a box-ticking exercise. It's about genuine collaborative partnerships.
You got it, and getting it right is crucial.
Yeah.
The book stresses understanding and respectfully engaging with Indigenous governance structures.
Okay.
We're talking about nation-to-nation relationships built on mutual respect and a deep understanding of cultural protocols.
That makes perfect sense. Now, the book isn't all theory, is it?
No, it's not.
Are there any real-world examples that illustrate how these principles are being put into practice?
Absolutely. The book is chock full of compelling case studies. Take Company A, for instance.
Okay.
They completely overhauled their approach, focusing on genuine partnerships with Indigenous communities.
Hmm.
They integrated joint planning processes and ensured Indigenous representatives had a seat at the table for every major operational decision.
That's a pretty radical departure from the traditional top-down approach.
Right.
What kind of impact did this have on their bottom line?
Get this, they saw a significant boost in productivity,
Wow.
but it goes way beyond that. They saw improvement in community relations,
Hmm?
better health and education outcomes in the communities they engaged with.
Yeah.
It's a perfect illustration of how aligning with UNDRP can create a ripple effect of positive change.
That's truly inspiring, and it sounds like Company A isn't alone in seeing these kinds of benefits.
No, they're not.
Are there other companies taking a similar approach?
Oh, absolutely. Another standout example is Company B,
Okay.
who really embraced this idea of co-creation
Mm.
with Indigenous communities.
Mm.
They saw their business performance skyrocket. New funding opportunities opened up, and their CSR metrics went through the roof. But here's the really interesting part. They attracted a whole new customer base.
Now, that's intriguing. What was it about their approach that resonated with customers?
Transparency. They were very open about their commitment to UNDRP,
Mm.
about their partnerships with Indigenous communities,
Yeah.
and the positive impact these partnerships were having.
Okay.
Consumers are increasingly savvy and are actively seeking out companies that walk the walk
Yeah.
when it comes to ethical practices.
So it's not just about doing the right thing. It's a savvy business move as well.
It proves that respecting Indigenous rights can be good for business, good for communities, and good for the planet.
Right.
It's a win-win-win.
This all sounds very promising, but how do we actually measure the impact of integrating UNDRP.
Right.
It can't just be a feeling, right?
You're absolutely right. The book provides some concrete frameworks for measuring tangible results.
Okay.
It emphasizes tracking things like the number and depth of community partnerships, the frequency and quality of consultations with Indigenous communities,
Yeah.
and the level of community participation in key decisions.
So it's about quantifying those partnerships and ensuring they lead to measurable outcomes.
Yes.
Now, what about the economic side of things?
The economic impact is crucial to track as well.
Yeah.
The book highlights looking at procurement from Indigenous-owned businesses,
Right.
investments in Indigenous entrepreneurship,
Mm-hmm.
and the number of jobs being created within Indigenous communities.
So it's about putting those good intentions into concrete actions and then tracking the outcomes.
Now, what about the cultural aspects of UNDRP?
Ah.
How does that play into business operations?
It's about recognizing and respecting Indigenous culture as an asset, not a barrier.
Okay.
The book encourages businesses to ask themselves some key questions.
Okay.
Are they incorporating Indigenous knowledge systems into their work?
Right.
Are they supporting cultural events and initiatives?
Yeah.
Is there representation of Indigenous voices at all levels of the organization, including leadership positions? So it's a holistic approach that goes beyond the bottom line, looking at the social and cultural impact as well. Now, one thing that struck me is that this all seems quite complex.
Yeah.
There must be some significant challenges in implementing these ideas.
You're absolutely right. There are definitely hurdles to overcome.
Yeah.
And the book doesn't shy away from those. In fact, it dedicates an entire section to exploring those challenges.
Well, that's a perfect segue into part 2 of our deep dive.
Okay.
Let's unpack those challenges and explore some potential solutions after a quick break.
Sounds good to me. Let's dive in.
All right, see you in part 2. All right, so we've laid the groundwork and seen some inspiring examples of companies embracing UNDRP.
Yeah.
But let's get real. Putting these principles into practice can't be all sunshine and roses.
Right.
What are some of the roadblocks that companies might hit along the way?
One of the biggest challenges, and I've seen this firsthand, is simply a lack of understanding.
Okay.
Some companies, especially larger corporations,
Mhm.
might not fully grasp the scope of Indigenous rights or the historical context that shapes these relationships.
So it's not just about having good intentions.
Right.
It's about really getting educated on the issues at hand.
Exactly. And this lack of awareness can lead to missteps, you know,
Yeah.
missed opportunities for genuine collaboration,
Right.
and sometimes even unintentional harm.
Now, even with the best intentions, are there practical challenges in actually implementing these new approaches?
Oh, yeah.
Trying to match them with existing corporate structures, for example.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Integrating Indigenous-centric models into traditional corporate structures,
Yeah.
especially those that are heavily focused on maximizing shareholder profits, can be a real puzzle.
Right.
Sometimes those two mindsets clash.
That's a great point.
Right.
So how do we bridge that gap?
Right.
How do you convince a company that's always prioritized profit to suddenly embrace a model that prioritizes Indigenous rights?
It requires a shift in perspective.
Yo.
The book argues that aligning with UNDRP
Yeah.
isn't a burden, but an opportunity for innovation and long-term sustainability. And there's data to back this up.
So you need to show them that doing the right thing can also be good for their bottom line.
Precisely highlighting successful case studies.
Yeah.
Showcasing the positive financial impact alongside the social and environmental benefits can be a powerful motivator.
What other challenges does the book address?
Well, building trust is huge.
Okay.
And it's not always easy.
Right.
Some companies, especially multinational corporations,
Yeah.
might struggle to gain the trust of Indigenous communities, and for good reason.
Yeah.
There's a long, painful history of broken promises and exploitation.
So how do you overcome that history of mistrust?
It takes time and a
Uh-huh.
genuine commitment to transparency and accountability.
Okay.
It's about showing up, listening, learning,
Yeah.
and demonstrating a willingness to change.
It sounds like a lot of heavy lifting.
It is, but the book makes a compelling case that it's worth the effort. The benefits far outweigh the challenges, and in the long run, everyone wins.
Okay, so we've identified some major hurdles now. Let's switch gears and talk solutions.
Okay.
What does the book recommend for overcoming these barriers?
First and foremost, involve Indigenous communities from the very beginning.
Wow.
Don't just show up with a plan already made.
Right.
Conduct thorough stakeholder analysis.
Mm-hmm.
Identify key Indigenous leaders and organizations.
Yeah.
And build those relationships early on in a genuine and respectful way.
So it's about co-creating solutions rather than imposing them from the top down?
Exactly. And that requires companies to be humble,
Yeah.
to truly listen to and learn from Indigenous perspectives.
Okay.
This is where a deep understanding of Indigenous knowledge systems
Right.
becomes essential.
That makes sense. Now, what about addressing those internal challenges within a company?
Yeah.
How do you create a company culture that actually supports UNDRIP?
Education is paramount.
Okay.
The book is very clear about the need for comprehensive employee training programs.
Hmm.
It's about teaching employees about UNDRP principles,
Hmm.
about the history of Indigenous rights,
Yeah.
and the crucial role of Indigenous knowledge systems in shaping sustainable practices.
So it's about shifting mindsets from the inside out.
Exactly. It's about creating a workforce that's informed, sensitive, and equipped to engage respectfully and effectively.
Yeah.
With Indigenous communities, it's about building allyship from within.
All right, this all sounds promising, but are there any concrete examples of companies successfully implementing these strategies?
Absolutely. Company C, for example, really took this to heart.
Okay.
They made collaborative partnerships and the co-creation of value within Indigenous communities their top priority.
And how did that play out for them?
They saw a significant boost in brand loyalty.
Wow.
Their market share expanded.
Okay.
And they created a significant number of jobs within Indigenous communities.
Mhm.
They proved that aligning with UNDRP isn't just an ethical obligation.
Right.
It's a smart business strategy.
So they basically demonstrated that doing good is good for business.
They did, and it wasn't just about profits. They also noticed a marked improvement in employee morale.
Right.
Their staff felt proud to work for a company that truly valued ethical and sustainable practices.
That's a fantastic outcome. Any other real-world examples that showcase these strategies in action?
Oh, definitely. The book highlights a mining company
Right.
that decided to incorporate traditional ecological knowledge into their environmental assessments. They even established profit-sharing agreements
Wow.
that directly benefited the Indigenous communities on whose land they were operating.
That's impressive. It shows a genuine commitment to sharing the benefits of their operations.
Exactly, and it underscores this core principle of UNDIP reciprocity.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that businesses have a responsibility to give back to the communities they operate in.
So we've covered challenges, solutions, and real-world examples of companies making it work. Now, the book also talks about something called reconciliation action plans.
Yes.
Could you explain what those are and why they're important?
Reconciliation Action Plans, or RAPs as they're often called, are strategic frameworks that guide businesses in their journey towards reconciliation with Indigenous peoples.
So it's a roadmap for businesses to acknowledge past wrongs
Right.
and chart a course towards a more just and equitable future.
Exactly. RAPs help businesses identify areas where they need to improve,
Okay.
set clear targets, and outline concrete actions to participate in the reconciliation process.
What kinds of concrete actions might be included in an RAP?
It can vary depending on the company and the context,
Yep.
but common elements include increasing Indigenous employment and procurement,
Right.
investing in cultural heritage preservation projects,
Okay.
and supporting Indigenous-led initiatives in areas like education and health.
It sounds like a powerful tool for businesses to demonstrate their commitment to positive change.
It can be, and it often incorporates elements of traditional ecological knowledge,
Okay.
which is incredibly valuable for promoting sustainable practices.
Can you give us some examples of companies that have successfully implemented RAPs?
The book highlights a few really inspiring examples.
Okay.
One company focused on developing a comprehensive Indigenous procurement strategy, ensuring they were sourcing goods and services from Indigenous-owned businesses.
Okay.
Another company invested in building a cultural center
Okay.
in partnership with a local Indigenous community, creating a space for cultural exchange and learning.
That's fantastic. Did those companies see a positive impact from implementing those plans?
Absolutely. They reported improved relationships with Indigenous communities,
Yep.
a stronger corporate reputation, and even increased access to new markets as consumers become more aware of and supportive of companies committed to reconciliation.
It's fascinating to see how these seemingly abstract concepts are translating into real-world success stories.
It is, and these RAPs often tie into a company's broader corporate social responsibility strategy.
Right. We hear a lot about CSR these days. Can you explain how it connects to UNDRIP?
Integrating UNDRIP into a company's CSR strategy is a way to ensure that their commitment to Indigenous rights
Right.
isn't just an afterthought or a PR stunt.
Yeah.
but a core part of how they do business.
So it's about embedding those values into their operations, their
Yeah.
decision-making processes, everything they do.
Exactly. And it goes beyond just words. It's
Mhm.
about backing those commitments with concrete action
Yeah.
and measuring the impact of those actions.
Okay, so we've talked about challenges, solutions, reconciliation action plans, and the important role of CSR. What other areas does the book explore?
One really fascinating chapter delves into the role of indigenous knowledge systems in creating more sustainable practices.
Ooh, that sounds intriguing. Can you tell us more about that?
The book talks about traditional ecological knowledge, or TEK,
Okay.
which is a vast body of knowledge accumulated by indigenous peoples over generations.
So it's essentially a deep understanding of the environment
Right.
and how to live sustainably within it, passed down through generations.
Precisely. And the book makes a strong case that businesses have a lot to learn from tech.
How so? How can businesses actually incorporate tech into their operations?
Well, for one, it can inform more sustainable practices.
Okay.
Indigenous knowledge systems often prioritize biodiversity, ecosystem health, and long-term resource management,
Yeah.
things that are becoming increasingly important in today's world.
So it's about looking to indigenous communities for guidance on how to live in harmony with nature, not just exploit it.
Exactly. And it can lead to some pretty innovative solutions to modern environmental challenges.
Does the book give any real-world examples of businesses successfully incorporating tech?
It does. One example highlights a forestry company
Uh,
that decided to incorporate indigenous ecological knowledge into their operations.
and what kind of impact did that have?
They saw significant improvements in resource management, better biodiversity outcomes, and even stronger relationships
Wow.
with the indigenous communities they were working with.
That's fantastic. It's a powerful example of how traditional knowledge can benefit modern businesses.
It really is. It's about recognizing that indigenous communities hold valuable knowledge
Yeah.
that can help us build a more sustainable future.
We've covered so much ground already, it feels like we've only scratched the surface of what this book has to offer.
We have, and there's still so much more to explore, particularly the incredible innovations happening in the world of indigenous entrepreneurship.
Well, I can't wait to dive into that in the final part of our deep dive.
Me neither. It's an area brimming with potential and inspiration.
We're back for the final part of our deep dive into UNDRP in business.
Mhm.
And this time we're shifting our focus to something
Yes.
that's really captured my imagination, indigenous entrepreneurship.
It's an area that is bursting with energy and innovation.
I'm ready to be inspired. So what makes indigenous entrepreneurship so unique?
Yeah.
What sets it apart from the conventional business world?
It goes beyond simply adopting UNDRB principles. It's about embodying them. Indigenous entrepreneurs are building businesses that are deeply rooted in their cultures, their values, and their connection to the land.
So it's about more than just profits.
Hmm.
It's about creating something meaningful,
Right.
something that benefits the entire community.
Precisely. And they're doing it in ways that are incredibly innovative and sustainable.
All right, you've got me hooked.
Yeah.
Can you paint us a picture?
Yeah.
What do some of these indigenous-led ventures look like in practice?
One example that really stood out to me from the book is a company that's built an incredible business around sustainable tourism.
Interesting. What makes their approach so unique?
They've created these immersive cultural experiences that allow visitors to connect with indigenous traditions and knowledge
Okay.
in a way that's both authentic and respectful. They're showcasing their culture and heritage, sharing their stories,
Yeah.
and generating income for their community, all while minimizing their environmental footprint.
So it's about more than just ticking the boxes of sustainability. It's about creating a truly meaningful experience for both visitors and the community.
Exactly. And they've managed to attract a global audience, proving that businesses built on indigenous values can not only survive,
Wow.
but thrive on the international stage.
That's incredibly inspiring. Now, I'm curious, are there other examples that highlight this fusion of tradition and innovation?
Oh, yeah.
Are there indigenous entrepreneurs pushing boundaries in other sectors?
Absolutely. There's this fascinating case study about a tech startup that's using cutting-edge technology to revitalize indigenous languages.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Tell me more.
They've developed this incredible digital platform that's
Yeah.
not only helping to preserve these languages, but also creating educational resources
Right.
and fostering cultural exchange.
So it's about using technology as a tool for empowerment, for cultural preservation, and for connecting people.
Exactly. And it demonstrates the adaptability and ingenuity of indigenous entrepreneurs. They're taking traditional knowledge and weaving it together with modern technology to build businesses that are both culturally significant, and economically viable.
So what's the big takeaway here? What can other businesses, especially those large corporations we talked about earlier, learn from these indigenous entrepreneurs?
The book highlights the unique perspective that Indigenous entrepreneurs bring to the table.
Yep.
They often have a deep understanding of sustainability, community development, and long-term thinking that can be incredibly valuable to other businesses.
It's about learning to see the world through a different lens, one that values interconnectedness and reciprocity.
Exactly. And one of the most important lessons is that Indigenous entrepreneurs often prioritize the well-being of their communities and the environment over short-term profits.
So it's about shifting away from that extractive mindset and embracing a more holistic approach that considers the impact on future generations.
Precisely. And that long-term vision is something that all businesses, regardless of size or sector, can learn from.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation as we wrap up our deep dive. Is there one key message you hope our listeners take away from this exploration of UNDRP in business operations?
I hope listeners walk away understanding that aligning with UNDRP is not simply about checking boxes or mitigating risk. It's about opportunity.
Opportunity for what?
Opportunity to build better businesses, stronger communities, and a more sustainable future for all.
Hmm.
It's about recognizing that respecting Indigenous rights is not just the right thing to do, it's also a smart business move.
So it's about creating a win-win-win scenario. Good for business, good for communities, good for the planet.
Absolutely. And it all starts with a commitment to listening, learning, and collaborating with Indigenous communities.
This has been an incredibly insightful journey, and I feel like I've gained a whole new perspective on the role of business and reconciliation. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
It's been my pleasure. I encourage all our listeners to continue exploring this topic and to look for opportunities to support Indigenous businesses and initiatives.
And as always, keep diving deeper. That's all for this deep dive. Until next time, keep learning and keep exploring.